Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I would like to introduce Christine Grant, who will be kicking off tonight's programming.
Thank you, Samantha, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Rogow Distinguished Visiting Lecture Program in collaboration with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lecture Series panel discussion. Building Resilience and Connection, an Antidote in Challenging Times. The Rogow Distinguished Visiting Lecture Program brings celebrated authors, journalists, historians, academics, and artists to campus, in person or virtually, to enhance the knowledge base of both the campus community and the greater Hartford area. This series is a part of a wide array of public programming that the University of Hartford offers, fulfilling an important responsibility to serve the larger community of which it is a part. I believe it's safe to say that COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on our collective mental health, and with pervasive and well-documented increases in stress, anxiety, and depression. The goal of our discussion tonight is to promote the importance of and provide strategies for developing our resiliency and strengthening our community connection. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for this discussion, Dr. Jessica Nicklin. Jessica Nicklin is the Director of Talent Management at Hartford Healthcare and an adjunct faculty member in the Psychology Department at the University of Hartford. She recently transitioned into her new role with Hartford Healthcare from the role of Associate Vice President for Student Success here at the University of Hartford, where she oversaw the Center for Student Success, Health and Wellness Initiatives, tutoring services, accessibility services, counseling services, and a number of retention programs. She's had a number of higher education leadership roles, including Associate Dean for Student Services and Director for the Master of Science in the Organizational Psychology program, as well as corporate roles such as Market Research Analyst at IBM and Personnel Research Psychologist at the Office of Personnel Management. Her research interests include workplace motivation, the work-family interface, and how positive psychology constructs influence well-being and success. Jessica has received a number of prestigious honors and awards, and most notably, the Bell K. Ribicoff Endowed Professorship and the University at Albany Outstanding Alumni Award. I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Nicklin, and I want to say to her congratulations and thank you on behalf of the Planning Committee. Following the discussion tonight, time will be given for Q&A. Jessica, please take over.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. That was a great introduction, and thank you so much for having me. There's nothing like looking at a picture of yourself on the screen back at you. I'm so excited for this topic. As you can see, my background and different roles I've had, this is definitely relevant and important. And in preparation for tonight, I got thinking, okay, what really is resilience? What really is connection? So what did I do? I immediately went to Google and typed in, what is resilience? And it said ability to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, also known as flexibility or purpose. Okay, what is connection? A relationship in which a person or thing is associated with something else. Those two definitions for me just didn't do it. And that's the importance of this discussion tonight. I think we all know that resilience and connection is so much more than that. We need resilience for connection. We need connection for resilience. And there's different types of resilience. There's different types of connection. And the thing I love about this most, and you're going to see, and the panelists are so passionate once we get into it, is that this isn't going to be a higher level theoretical discussion. This is the kind of material that you're going to learn things tonight. You're going to be able to take things with you. And simple little changes in your day-to-day can have huge impacts on how you handle challenge and adversity. And that's what I love about it. You don't have to have a lifestyle change. You don't have to read tons of books. You know, you could do little things that have such a huge impact. And that's really what I love about this topic. So you'll see that from the panelists as well. So our panel is made up of, next slide, please. We have Najaya mentioned. Najaya is a psychotherapist in the Counseling and Psychological Services Department at the University of Hartford. As a mental health equity strategist, Najaya is committed to removing barriers that inhibit mental wellness and racial injustice. Najaya uses strengths-based, anti-oppressive, and attachment therapy approaches in her work with students. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Community Health and American Studies and minor in Africana Studies from Tufts University, and a Master of Social Work and a Master of Public Health from the University of Michigan. She is originally from New Haven. And in our effort to be positive and fun and forward-looking tonight, I asked each of the panelists to give me something that defines them or that's fun or interesting. And Najaya told me that she enjoys salsa dancing. So a little bit about our panelists. Next up is Frances Padilla. Frances is the president of Universal Healthcare Foundation of Connecticut. Since joining in 2004, she has held various leadership positions, in addition to spearheading the foundation's research and policy initiatives, which led to the design of the landmark Sustainment Law in 2009 and a building block for healthcare reform legislation in 2011. She serves on the Connecticut Healthcare Cabinet and has chaired a work group on prescription drug costs, focusing on transparency and fair pricing. She has also served on the steering committee for the State Innovation Model Initiative, advising on implementation of a $45 million federal grant to the state of Connecticut. In addition, she is a founding member and past co-chair of the Leadership Council of Connecticut, Choosing Wisely Collaborative. She serves on boards of Connecticut Council for Philanthropy and is chair on the board of Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. She is a graduate of Wesleyan and holds a master's degree in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School. And her fun fact is that she has a 12-year-old dog named Yoshi that makes her laugh and brings her joy every day. So thank you for joining us, Frances. And finally, our third panelist for tonight is Dr. Noel Cassiano. Dr. Cassiano is an assistant professor of psychology and human services in the University of Hartford's Hillier College. He teaches courses in psychology and the newly formed human services concentration. His research areas include neurobiology and trauma, substance use, effects of urban trauma, health equity, an assessment of mental health services, and the importance of parent-child attachment. He holds a PsyD in clinical psychology from the California Southern University, a master's in marriage and family therapy from Central Connecticut University, and a bachelor's in sociology from Central Connecticut State University. And he's going to be embarrassed now, but his fun fact is that he loves Krispy Kreme donuts. So I had to get a little personal with my panelists and not just give their bios. So obviously a very we're so proud of this panel, so much experience, so much to bring, and again, very passionate. And we all promised that given this topic of resilience and connection, that we were going to take this from a positive outlook. It's no surprise or secret that we've all been through a lot in the past 3 years, COVID, political climate, social climate, a lot of things. And we could dwell on that, but we're not going to. So without further ado, I've got some questions for the panelists. And throughout, I encourage you to pop other questions in the chat, and Lisa will be collecting them, and we'll devote some time to that tonight. So I'm going to start with Najaya. Najaya, for you, what does it mean? I read a definition, but what does it mean to you to be resilient?
Thanks, Dr. Nicklin. So I really think about resilience as a way to deal with difficult circumstances or stressful circumstances. So these situations can be personal to you. So if you think about your relationships or thinking about your own health or the spaces that you're in, like work, things like that. So, thinking about, excuse me, thinking about how to deal with things individually to you. But these kinds of stressors can also be happening on a larger level. So community level, societal level, or even a global level. So just alluded to, the pandemic that we've been in and how that's affected our day-to-day lives. If you think about things happening in the community, violence or discrimination against different communities, as well as even war. So I think it's really important to think about resilience, not only on an individual level, but also on a larger scale, and how we're able to deal with those really stressful situations.
Great. Noelle, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the way I look at resiliency is, or what does it mean to be resilient? What does it mean to be resilient is the ability to understand that in the midst of traumatic situations, negative life experiences, or adversity, how do we build certain skills that we can then use those negative experiences to be able to build those specific skills that allow us to not just survive, but to thrive, right? So understanding that those negative experiences are not what define who we're going to be. They're just those experiences that we can use to kind of understand that we have certain innate internal abilities, emotional abilities. And then when you think about the environment that we're in or the relationships that we have, I say that people that are resilient not only understand how to manage and cope with adversity, but when they are surrounded with people that are positive or have positive relationships in their lives, that makes them even more resilient, because now those negative experiences or adversities are buffered by our positive relationships that we have.
I like that you use the word buffer. I think that speaks to, needing to use that tool of resilience or connection. Najee, I know we spoke about activating resilience. What are some cues that might indicate that you need to use your resilience?
Yeah, so I think, thinking about the individual level, we can really look inward about how we're feeling. What are our emotions telling us, that can provide helpful information. So are you having really strong emotions to different things? Like, are you feeling sad, angry, anxious? Do you find yourself feeling more withdrawn than usual? You might also want to think about, what's happening in your body. So are you feeling any tension in your, neck or your back and different places in your body? You might want to think about certain pains that you might be having and be curious about it, what, could be helpful to alleviate some of this. And even your behavior. So Dr. Cassiano talked about community. And so do you find yourself being isolated from other people that you usually spend time with or usually enjoy spending time with? Do you find yourself maybe using only substances to deal with certain stressors? So I think our behaviors, feelings, and our bodily sensations can provide us helpful information to determine what those strategies are to build resilience and what can be helpful. And I just want to say that this is not from a place of judgment. We really want to be compassionate when we're thinking about this. So I wouldn't say that we're sharing a message about, like you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be resilient. And if I'm feeling angry or upset or what have you, about very valid reasons that you shouldn't feel that way. But what we are saying is, being curious about what might be going on for you and how we might want to, move from a place of judgment about how we might be feeling or denial to being curious and compassionate with ourselves. And you can do that in community and self-reflection. I would also add that, looking at signs at the societal level, there are ways that we can find to be resilient. So thinking about, there are very real policies and issues that might be hindering us from being able to thrive, like Dr. Cassiano mentioned. And so thinking about, how am I feeling about the war in Ukraine, or how am I feeling about the reality of my own neighborhood? And so really wanting to be curious and paying attention to how we're feeling about these larger issues.
Also, those are really great points that Najee brought up. But think about, because life is, life is like a roller coaster, right? Things, we experience highs and we experience lows in life. But when we are experiencing those lows or those disappointments or even failures, think about, how do you manage those? When you think about, okay, the last time I had adversity, how did I cope with that? Or maybe how did I use, healthy skills to overcome that? Or did I, resort to some kind of maladaptive ways of coping? Because if you notice that when you're facing adversity, that you tend to, turn to those maladaptive ways of coping, that's a good indicator, right? That, hey, I might need supports. I might need to understand me better. Those social emotional skills that I think that we all need to really understand. Like, what does it mean, when I'm happy, or what does it look like when I'm angry, when I'm sad? Understanding, having a good understanding of how those social emotional skills that we need in order to become resilient. And when we think about that, then we're able to recognize, okay, I have been resilient in these moments or in these particular experiences. And then when these other types of experiences have occurred, maybe I wasn't as resilient. So how can I become more resilient? And that's how you can pick up or recognize when you might need additional supports, or, again, being able to connect with others that can really support you in those challenging times.
Great, thank you. I'm trying to give space to make sure everyone gets to get out what they want to say. So we've been talking a lot about resilience so far, which is great, but we promised we would also talk about community and connection. Francis, as you're listening to the conversation, what's coming to mind in terms of the importance of connection?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Yes, it's about community. It's about connection, however you define community, right? Because community can be your neighborhood or the city you live in, the small town you live in, or it can be the community of your friends, of your colleagues, of people that you share values with. And the bonds, I think, that we have in community are so essential for resilience, because the reality is none of us lives alone in the world. And actually, human beings need connection. We know that we need to be able to relate to one another, and that connection helps to actually generate more resilience. And so as I listened to Najee and Noel, I was thinking about, resilience in this sort of a circular a cycle that we build it, and actually our experiences help us build more of it, so that it's not a static condition. It's not something that we are born with more than others. There are a lot of things that go into it, right? Optimism, and some people are naturally more optimistic, but it can be developed. And so community can help you with that. Community, whether it is a circle of friends that you can lean on when you're going through tough times, when you're realizing that you need some support and that you don't have to carry it all by yourself. And that actually your role will be next time when someone needs support to also jump in and be in there. And, I was reading about how the Department of Health and Human Services actually does work at the local levels, funds the local level governments to build community resiliency for disaster preparedness. So when you have, and it made me think a lot about what happened in Puerto Rico in 2017 with Hurricane Maria, where it was so devastating that people became disconnected from the rest of the world, from their devices, the ability to know what was happening in the next town, to know even what was happening down the street, right? They lost power, they lost cell power, they lost everything. Yet actually people just started looking for one another. People started looking out for one another. And the difficulty of that experience, so many people became stronger because it was really that social support that community offered. And I think about Puerto Rico, what happened just a couple of years later when everybody gathered to call for the resignation of the governor. And really, it is the resilience that develops and becomes more, like, creates more connective tissue. So I really do think that community and connection and relationships are very interrelated and essential to resilience at the individual level and at the larger, level of community and society.
So that was going to actually lead into my next question. So we've been talking a lot about resilience and connection from an individual level. When you think of these topics from a public health perspective, and I'll propose this to Najee or Francis, what comes to mind?
I can jump in if you'd like, and then Najee, the public health really emphasizes primary prevention. And primary prevention is essential in health because resilience and connection help to actually prevent illness and injury. And the social determinants of health, whether you have economic security, food security, housing security, feel safe, right, from violence or abuse, the sense of belonging and worth, thriving in school and work. We've mentioned a lot of these already, right? All of that adds up to primary prevention. So the resilience of individuals is actually connected to policies that we make as a society. You mentioned it earlier, Najee, that policies are either enacted or not, or bad policies are enacted that have a direct impact on people. And we see that in schools in the way, for example, police officers have been used to police students in public schools. That really sets up a dynamic that makes it very difficult for young people to feel safe, understood, believed. In some cases, those officers may be sources of support, but in many cases, particularly for young Black men, they're not. And so those are policies that we have to look at as a society and ask ourselves, what are we doing?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Francis. I would also, talk specifically about some of the health issues that we do see as a result of not being connected with each other. There's an increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, substance use, mental health concerns, even suicide and premature death. So I want people to really think about, connection is powerful, and it has an impact on both our health and our mental health. And so really thinking about, what ways are we able to support each other, to spend time with each other. Like those things aren't small at all. Like I think about places like Japan and the UK who actually have ministers of loneliness to actually promote social support and really, take into account that this is serious. And, as a society, this is what we value. We want to make sure that everyone in this community feels a sense of belonging. And so I think we can think creatively too about what ways we want to support and interact with each other, even during this time.
Well, I was at a conference a couple of years ago, listening to a physician talking about loneliness as an epidemic among the elderly. And the lack of connection, the social isolation that people experience as they become older, more infirm, and more separated from the people around them, the people that they love. And some people, it's interesting too, because resilience does play into this, right? The more resilient a person has been in their younger years, the more resilient they can be in their elder years. And yet, this idea of isolation and loneliness is a very serious one. We're seeing with the pandemic, right? One of the results has been isolation. At the same time that technology, look at us on Zoom, connected in ways that we wouldn't have imagined in 2019 even, right? And I was recently, my daughter-in-law was telling me about how her parents, who are originally from the Philippines and very frail in their health, they had to be isolated. They lived in California, but they got connected via Zoom to their original church community in the Philippines. And it was that really helped them weather that imposed isolation. So, I think what you were saying about illness, loneliness makes you sick. Loneliness will make all of your chronic conditions worse. And so the connection to others is an important antidote to that loneliness.
That reminds me of one time I was hearing Dr. Brene Brown speak on connection, right? And she said that when it comes to connection, we have to think about empathy and sympathy. I don't know if you heard her talk about that, where she says empathy builds connection, where sympathy drives disconnection. And what she was saying that when you really want to build connection, And when you're empathetic, you're trying to understand that person's internal and external kind of experience. When you think about empathy, is right, trying to be in the other person's shoes or trying to understand their world. So that builds connection, where sympathy is like, oh, I feel sorry for you. But it doesn't really draw you towards the person to really connect, right? It's just kind of like an emotional state. Yeah, I feel sorry that you're going through this experience, or that you're having a hard time right now. But it doesn't really build the level of connection that we really want to see. So when we think about connection, think about how important empathy is rather than sympathy, according to Dr. Brene Brown, right?
I think that's a great point. And you also made me think, and looking back at your bio, we've talked about the individual part, the social part, some of the community. What comes to mind for you from a neurobiological perspective? So there's things going on in our brains, having to do with trauma and what's going on in our environment, but then also from a resilience and connection perspective. So do you have anything to add from that? I'm kind of throwing you a curveball there, but.
Yeah, no, I love talking about this. And I think I have some students in the audience that probably, oh, not again, not this conversation, because they hear it a lot. But again, resiliency is something that you build over time. But when you think about neuroscience research and, in the last 20 years, how we're looking at this kind of, intrauterine kind of neurodevelopmental process that's occurring in the womb, we start to see that, the wiring of an unborn baby's brain starts around 59, 60 days after conception. So very early on, you have these early process of the brain starting to develop. Why is that important? Because depending on the mother's internal emotional health, external health as well, as far as who is she connected with, how is her environment, is she in a safe relationship, how is her nutrition and her health. All that is important to be able to kind of inform the process of that neurodevelopmental process that's occurring in the womb of that unborn baby's brain. Because by the time the baby's about to be born, they already have this kind of neurobiological disposition to understand the world that I'm going into is a safe world, or the world that I'm going into is an unsafe world, depending on the mother's kind of health, internal and external health. Then you start to look at, okay, now the baby's born with a particular type of temperament, right? When you think of perinatal psychology, based on that intrauterine experience. And now you start to build upon that with bonding and attachment experiences. So that intrauterine neurodevelopmental process, bonding and attachment experiences are key to be able to allow for that individual baby, infant, as is developing, to then be able to have the ability to be more resilient than other types of individual children or adolescents, based on those early on perinatal kind of experiences that baby had. So when you think about that, right, it's okay, we know that resiliency is built over time, but it just doesn't start at birth. We have to think about those kind of intrauterine experiences. And that kind of research finding and ongoing research that's happening is just informing a lot on how individuals build temperament based on attachment, based on bonding, and then how resilient can one be based on all those indicators before.
And you could see the passion coming out in your explanation. You're like, I'd love to talk about that. Thank you. This has all been so great. So before we transition to the question and answer portion of the evening, we promised you, tips and tools, things you could take away based on everything we've talked about. And the panelists have put together a great list of resources that I believe Lisa and Chris will send out after the presentation for you to dig into this a little more. But for the purposes of the discussion, I'll open it up to all three panelists. What do you think are some really critical tips, tools, resources that you recommend that could help support resilience and connection? So you could pick resilience or connection or do both, but what are things our panelists can start doing now or take away with them to really build their resilience and connection?
Well, I'll jump in if I may. I think a lot about optimism, and that optimism is sort of an important um, instigator of resilience, right? And how do we cultivate optimism is something that would be, here are a few tips that I feel, I relate to. One is to cultivate self-awareness. And I think, as Najee was indicating, when your body and your behavior are giving you indicators, be in touch. And that might require, like, I love to journal. I journal. I have notebooks since I was probably 12 years old. And I find that journaling just allows me to let it all out and to think about stuff and to let it sit there. And sometimes going back and I get insights. So journaling can be, and I've been in therapy too. I've gone when I've needed to, like, not just tough situations, like bad things happened, but times when I felt like I needed to understand how things were coming together or not coming together. So I think that's really important. And I will say, I'm Puerto Rican. People in my community, like, don't, like, oh, that's like, I'm not crazy. And we have such a stigma on trying to get help. Like, you wouldn't hesitate to go get care for cancer or care for, we go for our physicals. Some of us go for our physicals. Not everybody does, but we ought to, right? So that's an important thing. Go talk to someone who can listen to you and help guide you with really good questions. The other is, I call it, look for things that make you laugh and feel good. Hey, I read once this woman who only reads joke books at night. Only reads joke books at night so that she can go to sleep having laughed, because it releases endorphins, and that is good for you. The other is to be grateful and savor the small things. Accept the compliment. I learned a long time ago to just say thank you when somebody compliments me, and not say, oh yeah, this jacket is so old. No, you like it? Thank you. Appreciate the compliment. Just accept it. And then to make an attempt every day to connect with somebody. Like, don't go through life without, connecting at some level. It could be very simple, doesn't have to be a big to-do. So those are the tips that I would offer.
Yeah, I would add, also plug for therapy. If you're in Connecticut and you have Medicaid, or it's called Husky here, therapy and behavioral health services are covered, so it's free. You don't have to pay anything. So plug for that. And then in the resources that you'll receive, there are things called Open Path Collective or other directories where you can select, sliding scale, or Open Path Collective provides free to low cost options for therapy. So I want to plug that. I also want people to think about their own cultural traditions. So maybe therapy is not accessible to you for whatever reason. Think about things that have been helpful to you, like throughout your family or, in your own life. So it could be singing, it could be dancing, it could be, playing jokes or making jokes. I know social media has been helpful to me in seeing a lot of funny memes. Thinking about moving your body. I talked about being curious about, okay, why am I having this certain ache or pain, or why am I not feeling hungry when, I should be eating, or different things like that. So, moving your body is another tool that you can use in terms of building your resilience. And, as Francis said, connecting with people, and it doesn't, necessarily have to be only in person, especially if your community is elsewhere, out of the country. And so, using social media can be helpful. There are a lot of free options to connect with people. WhatsApp, which is like a messaging platform that you can use with folks. And I also want to plug advocacy. And, in terms of feeling hopeful or feeling like you have, a tool at your disposal to fight, issues of oppression that might be targeting your community or other people's community, getting involved, whatever that means to you. So whether it's in your local community, globally, are you keeping up with the news or politics, you can write your representatives, just finding ways that, feel good to you in terms of advocating. I saw a really cool example when the earthquake in Haiti happened in 2021. And one of my friends who's Haitian was connecting with a relative that was on the ground. And so that person was able to, let everyone else know, like, what did they actually need? And through social media, really was able to get resources to that community. And so I just, want people to, feel hopeful. Like, yes, I'm not even saying like systems of oppression are very real, but we also have, power in our own communities to address our needs and to support each other.
And I would pile on to that, Najee. The foundation does a lot of our work is advocacy, right, around policy change. And we've got, we need to build power. Power is really grassroots power. It's what's going to make a sustainable difference. And there are so many people who can become advocates, and in that process, build community and build support for one another. And I would really emphasize and endorse what you're saying, that working in the community with other people, getting involved on any number of issues in healthcare or in any other area that you're driven to, that in and of itself creates community, and it makes change, which is so essential, right, for addressing the root causes of some of the lack of resilience that we may have.
Yeah, so a couple tips. So number one, I would say reframe your thoughts. Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a psychiatrist, talks about ants. Ants are automatic negative thoughts. And he says that these automatic negative thoughts hijack our, mind and emotional state on a daily basis. Multiple times we get these ants. I'm not smart, or I can't do this. I'm not loved, and a lot of times he says those ants, those automatic negative thoughts that come into our mind are most of the time not true, right? But we accept them as they are. So if we reframe our thoughts, if we, challenge those ants that come into our brains every day, we can become more resilient. So reframe your thoughts. And, the second thing I say is, build your community. And we've said that a lot already, so I won't spend too much time on it. But it's so important when you think about people that have hurt other people, that have committed horrible crimes or done very negative things. Those people are usually individuals that are isolated, that are withdrawn, that are not surrounded with positive relationships. So if you can build your community, that's so important. And another thing is focus on what you can control. A lot of times, adversity or challenges that come into our life, there are things that we can't control, like, I can't control the price of gas. So why am I going to get all stressed out about it? Right. But there are things that we can control and there are certain things that we can't. But understanding that those things that we can't control, we just have to kind of work through it and just kind of let it go and not let it affect us as much, because we really don't have that much power over the price of gas. Right. So looking at what you can control and what you can't control and being able to manage that a little bit better and manage stress. When we think about neurobiology, stress and trauma and adversity hijacks our brainstem, right, which is our lower level of, of our brain. And when trauma and stress hijacks our brainstem, it affects the way that we are able to build relationships, to thrive academically, or be able to access our executive functioning part of our brain. But if we're able to manage stress, and how do we do that? When we think about what's really good, when we think about cognitive behavioral therapy, okay, that's good for, executive functioning part of the brain. But what's really good for the brainstem are those things that are repetitive, consistent, kind of routine things. So, music, art, dance, yoga, exercise, right? All those things are really good for our brainstem and allows us to manage stress much better than, I'm not throwing cognitive behavioral therapy under the bus, but it's, that's good for other things like cognitive restructuring. But if we want to manage stress and trauma better, it's with those repetitive routine things that we can do that helps us overcome stress and lets us become more resilient. So reframe your thoughts, build your community, focus on what you can control, and manage stress.
I think those are all awesome from all three of our panelists. And if I may, it reminds me, everything you're saying, a tool that I use is self-compassion, and I try to teach it to students and people around me, which is, we're so kind to other people, but we don't tend to be kind and forgiving to ourselves. And being self-compassionate includes being mindful. So feeling like your body, like you said, Najaya, self-kindness, like you just said, get rid of those ants, and then common humanity, that we're all in this together, and that we're not the only person feeling this way, and don't isolate yourself. So it really brought me to that tool that I like to use. That's easy to say, it's okay that I was late, or it's okay that this happened. These things happen and we move on. So I think it all fits with resilience. So thank you. That's great. We're getting some of the Oscar music, I think, from Lisa to, to transition to the Q&A part of the presentation. So Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jess. Yes, me turning on my camera was my version of the Oscar music. So my name is Lisa Cote, and I'm the Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at UHeart. And we have a whole bunch of great questions that have come in for our panelists. So one quick comment that came in is that sometimes we just don't know that we need support, as we may think we can handle the situation. However, open forums like this seminar may make someone aware that it is okay to seek support. So on the heels of that, thank you all for being here and sharing your expertise with us. And hopefully folks will be able to take what you've shared with us out into the world with them. All right, so now for a question. I often encounter students who struggle with imposter syndrome. This often makes it difficult for them to connect and cope. What suggestions do you have for them?
Can I respond?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. So I'm
Go
very
ahead, Frances.
briefly, I'm going to respond as a person who's been out of college for a very, very long time. But as an undergraduate, I suffered from imposter syndrome. And it was very, very hard. I got to Wesleyan, and it didn't take long for me to feel like, wait a minute, somebody made a mistake here. And I have been lied to. That's how I felt. I've been lied to for a long time, and I'm just not really material for this place. It was very difficult. And, it took me a bit of time. One thing I did was I left for a while, and I went and I did something. I went to my brother's and I stayed with him and his wife, and I got a job, and I gradually started to feel like I was a capable person again. And I let them love me. I accepted that, right? I accepted that they weren't asking me why did I leave school or whatever. And then gradually I got my bearings again and I went back. And so leaving sometimes, and I don't mean to encourage people to leave school, okay? Like as your immediate response. But if I hadn't left school, I would have been in the hospital. I know that. And so it's okay. And as Jessica said, I gave myself, it took a while, right? I didn't have the language, I didn't have the full understanding, and it took a while, but I gave myself space and grace.
Thanks for sharing, Francis. I can definitely relate to experiencing imposter syndrome at Tufts. I would say what helped me was finding community. So whether it was, other students who were experiencing what I was experiencing, or being able to talk to professors or staff who looked like me, who affirmed my intelligence and that I deserved to be there and that I belonged. So I would recommend that people, find community, if it's at UHeart or elsewhere, where they can see themselves and be validated.
Yeah, for me, I think I experienced a little bit of imposter syndrome in my lifetime as well. And what I noticed that helped me was overcoming my defensiveness. Why was I so defensive? Why was I so guarded? And it was because of obviously my own personal kind of childhood traumatic experiences that I built these defenses, and then I created this world that was probably not realistic, right? So I had to understand I need to not be so defensive. I need to be or allow others to mentor me or to be positive role models for me, and for me to accept those relationships and not think that everyone was out to get me or that everyone was going to hurt me. But breaking down that defensiveness was really big.
Yeah, I'll just add that imposter syndrome isn't just something that just shows up in people, like the environments that they're in and the people they're surrounded with, and their context provide certain messages to them that makes them feel that. So whether it's, professors or the culture of a school, that's making people question, like, do I belong here? Or people are asking you like, oh, were you here based on affirmative action or something ridiculous? So I just want to point that out too, that it's not just something like, oh, they thought they had imposter syndrome today, but they're actually external factors that contribute to people feeling that way. And how can we look at, the systems or the context that they're in and change it so that students, all students feel like they belong and that they feel capable.
Thank you all so much for those answers and for sharing your own little bits of your own personal experiences with us. We appreciate that. Next up we have, do you think COVID will have a long-lasting effect on people's resiliency and how they cultivate resiliency? Noelle, I saw you nodding.
Well, I didn't want to be first, but it's okay. I think COVID it's kind of a double-edged sword for me, right? I think that COVID has allowed many people to become more resilient because of the way that we had to adapt to this kind of new kind of way of living, understanding, that, oh my God, am I going to have enough toilet paper, and overcoming, those little kind of very kind of simple things. But all the way through, I just lost a family member, right? And I'm not able to go to the funeral. So how do I, grieve from a distance without that level of support? So in one way, COVID has allowed many people to become resilient. But on the other side of that coin, it also has, created an environment where we have become more disconnected. And that's what's going to take more time for us to kind of be able to get back together and build our community again, without, the fear of, this pandemic.
I also think that there's a lot of the impact of COVID has made people more mistrustful of one another, and it's sort of in gradations, because in some cases mistrustful, at the extremes, because we know we've been living in this polarized world where a public health emergency was turned into a political hot potato. And then I think mistrust at another level, which is just not feeling safe enough. Some people might wear masks, choose to wear masks long after it is necessary, because they'll never yet again feel safe enough. So I agree that the long-term effects are yet to reveal themselves fully, but that we will have a lot to contend with. We have a whole generation of children and youth who have lived through the most extraordinary 2.5 years, or 2 years, right? And that the impacts of that on their mental health, their development, their ability to build relationships is something that we in the collective have to pay attention to, and move at community level, public policy level, and individual levels to attend to.
Thank you. I still have a few more questions, but I'm going to try to be very conscious of people's time this evening. So unfortunately, we will not be able to get to the rest of the questions. But I would like to just say thank you so much to Najea, Noel, and Francis for serving as our panelists, for the insights that you shared, and for helping us explore these important topics and giving us some tips on how we can build our resiliency and our connections. And Jess, thank you for your thoughtful questions, and for everything that you did for this program, especially while transitioning roles. So we truly appreciate all of you. Samantha, can I ask you to pop up the slides again? Please and thank you. We also want to say thank you to Samantha for managing all of our technology. We would like to say a special thank you to the Rogow family for their ongoing support of these programs. And a thank you to our DEIJ Lecture Series Planning Committee. You can see all of the names listed up here on the screen: Lillian Page, Michael, Chris, Christina, Jane, Ing Shui, Jimmy, Samantha, Jaleesa, Bilal, T, Sally, and another Lisa. So thank you all so much for everything you did in helping with the planning of this. And we would like to invite you to attend some of our upcoming programs. These are not all of the ones we have for the rest of the semester, but a good sampling of the next ones to come. Beyond Pronouns, Creating a Gender Affirming Campus on April 12th. Belonging and Not Invisible Asian Americans and the Bamboo Ceiling, which is in honor of Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American Heritage Month. That will be April 13th. And then on April 19th, we'll have a conversation with authors E.J. Dion and Miles Rappaport about their new book, 100% Democracy, The Case for Universal Voting. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And thank you again to our panelists and to Jess and Samantha.